This is rental car number 92, and today I'm driving the 2018 Audi A6 Premium 2T Quattro. Now, this is definitely a luxury car. It retails for about $52,000, which is way more than the cars I typically drive. And because of that, there's a lot to talk about. So let's skip the basic setup. Let's pop the hood and start by taking a look at what's underneath. So as I mentioned, this car has Quattro, which is just a fancy way of saying it has all-wheel drive. Quattro, by the way, just means 4 in Italian, if you're curious. Anyway, this is a 4-cylinder engine with an 8-speed automatic transmission that has sport shift capability. All that kicks out an impressive 252 horsepower, and you get some pretty good speeds in this car. You can go 0 to 60 in 5.8 seconds, and you have a top track speed of 130 miles an hour. Now, I got nowhere near that when I was driving this thing around, but it's still a ton of fun to drive, even if you adhere to the speed limits. With all that power, you do get some decent gas mileage. This one gets 22 miles per gallon in the city, 31 on the highway with a 26 combined rating, and that has a 19.8 gallon fuel tank, and that fuel cap is located on the passenger side. Alright, so that's a lot of stats and figures, but what does it all really mean? Well, in my experience, driving this car is a ton of fun, especially going around corners. This car just hugs the road like you wouldn't believe. Honestly, when I'm going around these tight turns like this, I honestly felt like I could slam down on the accelerator and I wouldn't slip a bit. And speaking of acceleration, wow, is this fun. Remember, you can go 0 to 60 in 5.8 seconds in this 4-door family-style sedan. That's nuts, especially when you compare this to most of the other rental cars I typically drive. So, performance-wise, this is off the charts. I had a ton of fun accelerating onto the interstate, and I was finding all kinds of excuses to pass vehicles on the road. I took a couple of off-ramps just because I could accelerate back onto the road again. Honestly, it really is that fun. Alright, so that's my quick take on performance, and honestly, I'm not much of a performance guy. What I tend to gravitate towards is more like features and comfort on the interior of the vehicle, and the A6 actually has quite a bit to talk about. The place I'd like to start is with the driver's seat. Now, this is what Audi calls its 8-way power front seats. There's a number of ways to adjust this. What I really liked was the lumbar support. You can adjust it in 4 separate directions and get it really comfortable. I'm starting to get to be a little bit of an older guy, so I really appreciate this, especially on long trips. Also, I thought it was worth mentioning that the seatbelt itself is actually adjustable. Now, you do see this on a lot of sedans, but I've never seen a control system like this before that is quite this attractive and this functional. Really, it's kind of fun to play around with. Alright, so let's switch gears and talk about the key fob. I like this one quite a bit. It's got a great weight to it, nothing on the back, 4 buttons on the front, lock, trunk release, unlock, and then a panic button. It's made out of really high quality material, so it feels great in your hand, and you should expect that out of a $52,000 sedan. And because you have a key fob, there's no actual key. You get a push button start that's located in kind of a weird spot down here by the gear shift. It's just a small circular button, and when you press it, my favorite thing happens. The center display pops out of the dash and slides open. Super satisfying to watch every time. Here's the steering wheel, great circular shape wrapped in soft leather. There's a bunch of buttons on here. On the left-hand side, these are the controls to adjust the digital display in the gauge cluster. All these work great, made out of really nice materials, by the way. Right-hand side, you have a button to interact with the navigation and voice commands along with your volume rocker. You also have your sport shift paddles right here behind those controls. And then up above, you have a great gauge cluster, 2 nice big dials, and then a huge digital display right in the center. Honestly, I think Audi has the best gauge cluster out there, at least in my opinion. I really like how sort of flat the black color is, and this digital display is really quite fun to play around with. There's a number of menu structures in here, so you can see all kinds of crazy information about the car. And then you can also switch it over to navigation, which is cool because you can get one kind of navigation, maybe like street level, right here in the gauge cluster. And then on the center display, you can also have maybe a zoomed out version of that same map. So it's really nice to be able to sort of glance at both while you're driving. Alright, so that's the gauge cluster. Before we move on to some other controls on the vehicle, let's shift back to the steering wheel and play around with the horn real quick. This is not super exciting, but let me just give you a taste of what the Audi sounds like. Kind of wimpy in my opinion, but then all the horns are kind of sounding the same lately. Anyway, over to the left, you have a number of controls over here. Window controls right here, made out of nice quality materials and accented in metal, which I kind of like. Up above right here, you have the controls to adjust your side view mirrors. These were great. Trunk release is kind of a little bit down below, right on the door. It's kind of easy to reach though, it's in a good spot. And then above there you have your door latch, the locks, and then the memory seat buttons. I kind of like that these lock buttons, first off there's two, right? Not just a toggle switch, but it also illuminates when you lock the door. So there's a little red light that's always visible when the doors are locked. It's a nice feature. And then down below right here you have a dial to adjust the automatic headlights, and then controls to adjust the brightness of the display in the center console. And then I quickly mentioned it a second ago, but let's talk about side view mirrors. First off, there is no blindside detection on the A6, which is kind of disappointing, but then again, I didn't have any visibility problems driving this car. I do want to point out that there's this slight discoloration, kind of this blue tint, all around the edge on the side view mirror. It's tough to see because my camera is not great, but it's kind of a really nice touch. I really enjoyed it. Also, there is a light on the side of the mirror. You can see it just right here, and it illuminates when you have your turn signal on. It's very faint, so it's not distracting, but it's nice to have that, just as an extra warning if you leave that turn signal on for too long. All right, enough about side view mirrors. Let me show you the controls that are up towards the ceiling of the vehicle, because there's quite a few of them. First off, you do get 3 buttons to program your garage doors. It's a luxury car. I'm assuming you have a huge house with at least 3 garage doors. There's also simple controls to adjust whether or not the lights are going to turn on when you open a door to the vehicle or not. I like that these are simple and easy to use. Also, there's lights to illuminate the cabin. I'm pretty sure, although I'm not 100% certain that these are LEDs, they are behind glass, which is really nice. It gives it a kind of a luxury feel to it. There's also a sunglass holder tucked away right here, and then a rear view mirror with an automatic dimmer feature that has a button to turn it on and off right on the front of the mirror itself. And then one control that I kind of brushed past intentionally is the sunroof controls. These work great, super easy to operate, and the sunroof is a decent size. I have to be honest, I kind of wish this was a huge moonroof. I think it would make the A6 that much better, but this works fine. Opens and closes at a decent speed, and I had no trouble operating it at all. Alright, so let's shift our gaze downward and talk about the center display. I showed you how it pops out of the vehicle when you turn it on, which is really cool. And this display is pretty nice. One thing you should know, though, is that it's not a touchscreen. So you have controls that are kind of down near your waist, near the gear shift, to interact with this. So there's a sort of a knob that you twist, and then a couple of buttons associated around there that allow you to pick different options that are displayed on the screen. Overall, this worked great. There's a ton of features on here to play around with, and the display itself is nice and crisp, has beautiful colors, and it's easy to see. The car also has Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, so if you have access to either of those programs, you can have even more functionality built into the vehicle, which I think is great. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, so it's nice to be able to pause, rewind, do that kind of stuff through the car, rather than having to pick up my cell phone. The one complaint I have, and this is probably easily fixable if you actually own the vehicle rather than just renting it, but the owner's manual wasn't actually loaded into the system yet. So typically with these higher end sedans, the owner's manual is accessible through this display, which is great, because if there's a feature you don't know how to use, you can quickly learn about it. But unfortunately, the owner's manual wasn't loaded on this car when I drove it. Alright, so let's shift our gaze a little bit further down. I want to point out the hazard buttons is right below the display. And then down here you have a CD player with some memory card slots right here, so you can load additional information into the vehicle. It's kind of fun to play around with. Below there you have a number of buttons to turn off some of the features like park assist and traction control. And then below there, slightly behind the gear shift, you have your climate controls. I really like these a lot just because of how precise they feel. When you do turn one of these knobs, you get a very satisfying clicking noise. And you just don't get that on a lot of cars these days. Some of them are made out of kind of cheap plastic and they slip a little bit. So it just feels great to interact with these controls. It's also super easy to use because you have very easy controls to adjust the temperature right here. The fan is in the center, and then you have big buttons for pretty much everything else that's important. So great climate controls. These work great. Below there you do have a storage area. This looks really attractive, especially since the lid itself has that wood inlay on it. It's really nice to see. Behind there you do have a gear shift. As I mentioned before, it has sport shift capability, so you can use those paddles up on the steering wheel, or you can push the gear shift itself over to the right and then shift it kind of like a sports car, at least a little bit. And then there's also a number of controls down here, and all of them are really easy to reach. The first one I want to mention is the electronic parking brake. It's located right here to the left of the gear shift. It's just kind of a switch that you pull up or push down on. This works great, although lately I haven't really liked these. I like more of a manual type parking brake. And then behind the parking brake is a touchpad that allows you to interact with the center display using just your finger. It's kind of fun that depending on what feature you're using, numbers illuminate, so you can type in numbers. It also recognizes handwriting, which is kind of fun, but honestly, I only drove this car for 2 days and didn't get a chance to try this out that much. And then a little bit behind there are the main controls that you use to interact with the center display. We talked about these before and they were great. The volume controls are located right here, and then directly above there is the start button for the vehicle. So it takes a little time to get used to having most of the main controls right here in the vehicle, because they're usually up on the console itself, but I got used to it pretty quick, and I think you will too. Just want to mention that behind there you do have your cup holders. These work fine, nothing really exciting to talk about. And then there's also a center armrest that has a little bit of functionality to it. You can open it in 2 ways. The first way reveals kind of a shallow shelf system that you can use probably to store your cell phone. It is lined in felt, so it'll take care of all your electronics. Below there is a slightly larger area. Has a number of ports, 2 USB ports, an auxiliary jack, and then also a power port. This is also kind of shallow, but honestly, I think it fits my phone perfectly, which is really nice to see. Alright, so let's close things out in the front seat by talking about the glove box. And there's actually quite a bit of fun things to talk about in here. First off, if you open it up, you'll see that there are some shelves built in, so you can keep things somewhat organized in here. There's also the valet button right here, so you can lock down some of the functionality of the car if you decide to use valet parking. So all in all, a pretty good glove box, all things considered. Alright, so that's all the basic highlights of the front seat that I want to talk about. Let's jump in the back seat so we can take a look at the kind of features your passengers are going to get to enjoy when they ride along with you in the A6. First off, legroom back here is pretty good. I'm 6 feet tall, I have that driver's seat pushed back a good ways, and I still have about 6 inches of room between my knees and the back of that seat, which is nice. The back of that seat does have cargo netting, which I'm typically not a fan of, but this appears to be made out of, nice quality materials, so it's not too bad. Also, the controls back here are almost identical to the ones you get in the front seat, so everything is made out of really nice materials. The one thing I wasn't quite a fan of is there appears to be an ashtray still built into the door, and it would have been nice if Audi would have removed this and maybe replaced it with something else. But all in all, it's not a big deal. Also, on the back of the center armrest for the front seat, there are a number of controls for your passengers. You do get 2 dedicated vents along with a temperature dial to adjust the temperature setting back here. And then below there you do get 2 power ports, although your passengers will need adapters to use those. Up above, there's the handle that I typically hang my jacket on, but it's nice to see that Audi has added a small hook just so you can hang things here. It's a small feature, but one that I really appreciate. Something I also appreciate is the center armrest back here. It's probably one of the best ones I've seen. Folds down pretty easily. Inside there's a small storage area that's perfect for maybe a tablet computer or a couple of cell phones. And then in the front of that unit, with just a gentle push, you reveal 2 cup holders that sort of pop out. It's kind of fun to play around with and keeps them stowed if you don't need them. Also back here you have a number of car seat anchors. Now these are standard in all vehicles, and typically I get annoyed because they're buried so deep behind the seat. But Audi has done something new by adding small plastic covers that you can remove to have really easy access to these anchors. I love this feature, and honestly I hope that all the other auto manufacturers take note and do the same thing. And then the last feature I want to talk about is just how easy it is to collapse these back seats. You just have to give this small plastic control a gentle pinch, and the seat collapses down almost all on its own. I'm not sure if you also noticed, but let me do it again. There's a small lock feature right here, so you can use the key that's hidden in the key fob to lock these down if you don't want someone to have access to the trunk. Anyway, it's not true of every sedan that this is easy to do, so it's nice to see Audi has done such a nice job. And when you do collapse those seats down, I think you'll agree that you have a much bigger storage area to haul things around using this car, which is, well, it's important, especially considering how large that opening is to the cabin of the vehicle. Some of these higher-end sedans have kind of a small opening, which is kind of annoying, but this reveals quite a big space to allow you to store all kinds of things using this car. All right, so that's all the major highlights of the back seat. Let's pop open the trunk and just take a quick look at it. First off, I think you'll agree that this is actually a very nice sized trunk. The wheel wells don't infringe on the space at all, so you get a very nice rectangular shape, easy to store things. Underneath the floor of the trunk space, you do get a spare tire. Not a full-size spare, but it's nice to see that Audi has kept this feature. Recently, Kia has started removing these, so I'm glad Audi is not following suit. Also back here, you have a number of hooks that you can use to tie down some of your larger items. And then there's also a small cargo storage area. It's surrounded by a cargo net, I should say, along with a DC power port back here that you can use to power some of your gadgets. All right, so that's everything back in the trunk space. I want to close things out by closing up the trunk and kind of looking a little bit further down at the vehicle at the exhaust. I just want to point out that you do get dual exhaust down here, and it's nice to see that they've styled things so nicely. I like this flat look of the exhaust. It really does add to the luxury feel of the A6. All right, so that's pretty much everything end to end on the Audi A6. Before we wrap things up, I just want to mention that I'm not sure if you noticed, but this is a brand new car. When I picked it up, it had 40 miles on it, still had that nice new car smell to it. It's pretty rare for me to get something this low mileage, so it's awfully fun. Also, I've actually driven the A6 and reviewed it once before, although there was about 6 to 8 inches of snow on the ground, so I really didn't feel like I got enough time behind the wheel to get a really good feeling for the vehicle. But this time I had it for 2 days, drove it for well over 150 miles, really drove it much more aggressively this time. And in that time, I really feel like I got a good feel for the 2018 A6. So what you should be asking me at the end of this video is, would I recommend this car to you? Yes or no? Yes, I mean clearly yes. I don't think I've reviewed a car in a while where I have gushed this much about a vehicle. Honestly, it might be because lately I've been driving things considerably cheaper than this vehicle, but all in all, there's really just not a whole lot to complain about the A6. It's great to drive, the acceleration is so much fun, and there's a lot of tech features to play around with. So, if you do get the chance, I highly recommend you take this one out for a spin. Anyway, that's it for now. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you join me next time when I review my 93rd rental car. I'll see you then.